to the elect, because it's not us, it's the spirit and the words of Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. It says, to the one we are the savor of death unto death, and to the other the savor of life unto life. And who is sufficient for these things? Because at the end, when the balance is weighed, those that are to be delivered of the elect are going to be delivered, and those that are going to be destroyed are going to be destroyed. For we are not as many which corrupt the word of the Most High, but as of sincerity, but as of the Most High, in the sight of the Most High speak we in Yahushai. No, and that's what we're doing now, and that's why you hate us, because you really hate Yahweh Bashem Yahushai.
Yeah, I got one. This is Ecclesiastes, the 9th chapter, beginning at the 4th verse. For to him that is joined to all the living, there is hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. Now, a dog ain't as powerful as a lion, but if the dog is alive, it can do something. Unlike a lion that is dead. For the living know that they shall die, but the dead know not anything. That's you, polite. You're dead. That's why you don't know anything. Neither have they any more a reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. And your memory that you're trying to build, very soon it'll be forgotten. You know?
Yeah, I got one more, and then we can move on unless y'all got some. It says, this is Proverbs 11 and 4. Riches profit not in the day of wrath. And he doesn't know that the wrath is coming, man. Yeah. That the time of Jacob's trouble is coming. It says, riches profit not in the day of wrath. So those Giuseppes ain't going to save your ass. They ain't gonna grow. They ain't gonna grow wings, and you're gonna fly to the planet Risk, all right, or back to Egypt. But righteousness delivereth from death. You see, there's another one, Proverbs 11 and 19. As righteousness tendeth to life, so he that pursueth evil pursueth it to his own death, and that fits you to a T, man. You know. But anyway, that's it on that. We're going to switch gears. We're going to go into a breakdown because last week at the end of the show, we did a breakdown of Revelation, the 17th chapter, because somebody asked us to break it down. So we did that. And Gabar had, because I said we're going to do it again, and Gabar had suggested Revelation 13, right? So we'll go to Revelation 13, and we'll go to that breakdown. So you can go ahead and read it.
Okay. All right. This is the book of Revelation, chapter 13, verse 1, which we touched on a little bit of it last week. When we were breaking down Revelation, the 13th chapter. The 17th chapter. This is Revelation 13 and 1. And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. Now there's a whole lot to this one verse here. Now what you have to understand, as we mentioned last week, when John wrote this, he actually seen an actual beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, and crowns upon their heads. He's seen, and the names of blasphemy, he's seen all of this. But what it was, he didn't understand that it represented the so-called white man's empire, or empires, going back from the time of the Greeks all the way up until today, because you had major certain groups or empires among the so-called white men that governed from the time of the Greeks all the way till now. They govern in different time frames because they had a certain time to rule, and then once that rule was up, then the next one would come in. And in some cases, some of the empires would absorb into the other one. They would be joined together, such as in the Greco-Roman Empire. Because when the Greeks went down, going down into around like 35 to 30 BC, they just became amalgamated into the Roman Empire and became like vassals to the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire took control of them. Then that empire came into being and flourished and got to its height and conquered the certain lands that were around. And then eventually what happened? That particular kingdom fell and that empire fell. You know, and then there was a time period where they were going back and forth. You know, and then there was a time period where the so-called white man's empire was taken down so much that for a period of 1,000 years they had no rule. You know, because Israel was ruling at that time pursuant to the prophecy of the scriptures. You know, so now that dragon with the 7 heads and 10 horns, you know, the 7 heads represented, as we stated last week, was the Greeks, the Romans, the French, the Spanish, Germania Major, Germania Minor, and Great Britain. I was gonna say Russia, but you know that's an old breakdown. But it's really Great Britain. You know, so these empires had rules, and back then they had ancient names that they were ruling under. You know, like you had the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, the Burgundians, the Heruli, the Anglo-Saxons, the Franks, you know, and so on and so forth. The Gauls.
The Gauls, which is France, the Vandals, and other groups like that.
That's right. You know, so that's why you have to know the region, those regions. That's why if you do if you watch certain documentaries on history, they'll show you those different names back then. That's right. They'll mention those names, and that was during a time of when they were ruling, you know, at a certain time, and certain of those kings fell because they fell to the ruling classes or the ruling Edomite empire, right? And then the 10 horns, as we stated last week, represented 10 other European nations that make up what today is known as the European Union, all right? And the names of blasphemy represent that they...
I believe there's 22 of them now.
I'm not sure. Yes,
it might be 26, 27.
Yeah. 26, 27.
Yeah,
but it started out as 10 horns.
Yep. That's right. You know, and they, you know, they all had certain period of time to rule, right? So now what John is seeing, the angel is showing John the beginning of this beast. So it says, and the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard. Now, when you go back into history, who is represented by the leopard? You know, the Greeks, but beginning with who? Alexander the Creep, you know, or as they call him in history, Alexander the Great.
Yeah, the last part, and the heads of, and upon his heads, the name of blasphemy. That was the fact they're trying to call themselves Christians. Yep. You know, they're trying to, right, they have the Pope. Yep. You know, a good example is the Pope, which he's supposed to represent the Son of the Most High, which is blasphemy. Yeah, you know.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Because, you know, that's what they do. You know, they make it seem like that's why Yahweh Shai said, many shall come in my name saying I am the anointed. Right. You know, and the when it says Christ, it basically means that the anointed, that they were taught or they were chosen to be the ones that teach the word of the Most High. You know, and it says, and which started off, it says, and the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard. And Alexander the Creep is known as a leopard. Matter of fact, when you read certain portions of the Josephus, when he came to Jerusalem, you know, and the priest met him, he told him, he said, look, I seen all of you in a vision, in a dream, all clothed in purple, and the name of the Most High in the heavens, you know. And then they showed him in the scriptures where in Daniel the 7th chapter and certain other places where it was speaking about him. And he said he perceived that the prophecy was speaking of him. So they understood that he represented the leopard, and then the Greeks represented that. So that was the beginning of this beast.
That was the first king.
Yep, that was the first king. That's right, because you have to, for everything that you do, you have to have a beginning. You know, so that was the beginning of the Edomite Empire, or the beginning of that 7 heads and 10 horns. All right? It says, and his feet were as the feet of a bear. So now... That's the Russians, because
the Russians are going to bring them down. They're all Edomites, but the Russians, remember, the Russians were never a part of that beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. Okay, neither was Alexander the Creep. He wasn't part of that union. He was before that union. That first union came about during the time of the pagan Roman Empire.
That's right. Yep. That's why it's known as Rome. It says, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion, and that's Great Britain. You know, because as we Elder Apostle Tar went over last week, in Jeremiah the 50th chapter where it spoke about your mother shall be confounded. You know, she's going to be ashamed of you.
One of the symbols for Great Britain is the lion. So I remember on the on the passport, there's a symbol.
Their flag, on their flag. The flag of Great Britain is a lion.
There's a lion, yeah.
Which they got from Judah, because the queen sitting up there saying that she's part of that line of royal of Judah. They're saying that they're Israelites.
Which again is an example of blasphemy. You know?
Did not.